When we think of forts, we often picture them as imposing fortifications with massive gates, gun turrets, and sentries posted along the walls, waiting for the next attack by some advancing aggressor. But in the early 1840s, the forts that the pioneers encountered were quite different. While in some cases they may have presented the appearance of a traditional fort, they were, in reality, trading posts along the 2,000-mile trek from Missouri to California. Unable to carry enough provisions to complete their journey, the pioneers depended on these forts to provide additional supplies of food and livestock, as well as repair services for their wagons. But getting these supplies and services was not always easy, and they usually came with high prices. Fort Laramie, located at the confluence of the North Platte and Laramie rivers, was the first stopping point on the pioneers' journey. Constructed in 1834 by William Sublette and Robert Campbell, it was strategically placed for the developing buffalo robe trade that was replacing the beaver fur trade. Originally named Fort William after William Sublette, William Marshall Anderson, and William Patton, in 1841, due to competition from other forts in the area, it would be rebuilt as an adobe structure named Fort John. It would later become known as Fort Laramie from its location on the Laramie River. In 1849, the fort would be purchased by the U.S. Army and operated until 1890. Located about 635 miles from Independence, Missouri, it would see several historic routes pass through it, including the Oregon and California trails, the Mormon Trail, and the Bozeman Trail. It would also be a stopping point for the Pony Express, the Transcontinental Telegraph route, and the Deadwood and Cheyenne stagecoach routes. By 1852, it was estimated that over 50,000 pioneers passed through its gates, and it would host the Great Indian Councils of 1851, 1866, and 1868. Fort Bridger was constructed in 1843 by Jim Bridger and Louis Vasquez. It was the third location of the fort, as the previous two locations were deemed unsuitable for protection. Located about 1,000 miles from Independence, Missouri, the fort consisted of an 8-foot stockade with a corral adjoining the north. Within the stockade stood 4 log cabins with flat dirt roofs. One held a forge and a carpenter's bench. The others were a store, a cabin for Bridger's family, and a cabin for Vasquez. In 1844, Isaac Hitchcock of the Stevens Townsend Murphy Party would recommend a cutoff from the Big Sandy River to the Bear River, basically bypassing Fort Bridger. While some pioneer wagons continued to take the trail to Fort Bridger, it would become most famous for its role in the Hastings Cutoff saga, which was a major factor in the Donner Party tragedy of 1846. With the arrival of the Mormons in 1847, several disputes over the fort began since at the time it was in Utah territory. In 1855, Louis Vasquez would sell the fort to the Mormons under power of attorney in Bridger's absence. In 1857, as the military approached to take control of Utah, the fort was burned. It would be rebuilt in 1858 and would remain a military post until 1890. In 1928, the Historical Landmark Commission of Wyoming purchased the fort and converted it to a museum. Only a small cobblestone wall of the original fort remains today. Nathaniel Jarvis Wyeth was a wealthy inventor and businessman, making his fortune through a method of preserving ice and selling it to Caribbean countries. Seeing an opportunity in the fur trading industry in the Rocky Mountains and Northwest Territory, Wyeth constructed Fort Hall in 1834. While he held lucrative contracts with the Rocky Mountain Fur Company, they refused to accept his goods, and in 1837 he would sell the fort to the Hudson's Bay Company. Under the control of the British, Fort Hall would become a center of conflict with the early pioneers. Usually a generous person, Post Commander Richard Grant was under strict orders to not sell goods to non-British citizens. This led to an incident between Grant and the Childs Walker Party in 1843, which was settled by what was described as less than pleasant means. In the 1860s, the fort would become a key post for the overland stage and mail and freight lines for the mining companies of the Pacific Northwest. In 1867, the fort was included within the Fort Hall Indian Reservation Treaty. In 1870, a new fort was built about 25 miles north of Fort Hall, essentially making it obsolete. Today, none of the original buildings remain. In 1839, the settlement of New Helvetia, or New Switzerland, was established by John Augustus Sutter. Leaving Switzerland under shady circumstances, Sutter would abandon his wife and 5 children, sailing to the United States in 1834. From 1841 to 1843, Sutters Fort would be constructed by natives of the Sandwich Islands, or Hawaii as we know it today, along with Miwok and Nisenan Native Americans. With adobe walls 2 1/2 feet thick and 15 to 18 feet high, the fort was an impressive structure. Located 1,975 miles from Independence, Missouri, the fort was the final destination for the thousands of pioneers headed to California in the 1840s. Noted for his meticulous record-keeping, Sutter would provide the most accurate and voluminous accounts of the westward migrations and events of the early history of California. In January 1846, Lansford Hastings is believed to have met John C. Fremont at the fort, initiating a series of events that would lead to the demise of the Donner Party. And in 1848, James Marshall would find gold while constructing a mill for Sutter on the South Fork of the American River, forever changing the landscape of California. After the gold rush began in 1849, as the city of Sacramento grew, the fort became less of a destination for westbound immigrants and fell into disrepair. By the 1870s, the central building was all that was left standing. In 1891, the native sons of the Golden West, who sought to safeguard many of the landmarks of California's pioneer days, purchased and rehabilitated Sutters Fort when the city of Sacramento sought to demolish it. While the forts along the Oregon-California Trail in the 1840s were never at the center of major conflicts or battles, they did play an essential role in the westward migration of thousands of pioneers. Thanks to the efforts of historians and preservationists, their contributions to the development of the West can be enjoyed by millions of people, including the descendants of those early pioneers who depended on the goods and services the forts provided.